Dear all participants, good morning and hope you're all doing well. I'm Vignesh Rajmaniratham, Assistant Manager for Technical and Training in IWMA and your host for the day. On behalf of our IWMA office bearers, executive members, speakers, and the senior manager, I welcome you all for the IWMA 12th webinar session on hazardous identification and risk assessment. Dear all participants, now I welcome our chairman, Mr. K. Bhaskaran, to give us an welcome address. Mr. K. Bhaskaran has served as an executive member and presently the chairman of IWME. He is also holding the position of secretary in Kakalur Industrial Estate Manufacturing Association and also A6 District Chairman for E-Waste Management Inlines Club. Our chairman is the CEO of Aarti Industries, an electroplating unit located in Ambattur, Kakalur and Padapai. Now I welcome our chairman on behalf of all participants. Sir, good morning, sir.
Thanks, Nish. Morning, Nish. Good morning to you all. Special thanks to our today's speakers, Mr. Suresh Tanwasar, Head of Audit Consultants, British Safety Council. And I also thank Mr. Sunil Kumar, Consultants, British Safety Council. I again welcome you for this wonderful session, sir. On behalf of our Industrial Waste Management Association, I also welcome our participants because in this COVID time, we are conducting, this is our 12th webinar, and you are also doing a good job, good support. Without you, it is not possible. That too, environment, you are very much interestingly, you are participating, all the participants. Once again, I thank you because see, if it is an environment, nobody will care about it, environment normally. That is why we are bringing more and more experienced expert speakers from various departments. Say today you can see British Safety Council, and he's also Mr. Sunil Kumar was ex-NARI scientist. He is worked in NARI scientist. Like that, we have very good speakers. We are going to conduct like this for every Saturdays. We got lined up a lot of programs about this IWMA. We are having nearly 3,000 industries in Tamil Nadu who is producing hazardous waste, including I am also producing one of the hazardous waste from the electroplating industry. That is why I have become this association for 10 years back. I joined as a secretary, AC member, then secretary, then chairman. I am holding this chairman. Thanks to our Joint Secretary Thirinjanam sir, he has also joined this program, and EC members, and our Vice Chairman Mr. Jagannath sir, our Secretary, and our Executive Committee members also they have joined. Some of them. I welcome you all for this wonderful program today. Actually, basically, this IWMA was started in the guidance of Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board. They have started with the 7 members committee. Supreme Court has given us some direction to the Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board, and by Tamil Nadu Pollution Control Board only, they told us to start our association for CSW TSDF site opening up. And initially they have given the land at Gumudi, and we are also selected. Our service provider, Ramki, is a TNWML. They are only handling that entire site. In Gumudi, we have 2 facilities. One is landfill, scientific landfill. Another one is incineration, scientific incineration we have. And for thanks to SIPCOT, they have given 27 acres. And now recently also we got another 32 acres to expand our landfill activities and other co-processing activities. We are going to bring co-processing also in that, e-waste and biomedical waste. All this waste, we are going to bring that 32 acres in Chennai, Gumudi. Apart from Gumudi, we have also having a site in Bargur. So another 22 acres we got from Bargur. So there we are setting up only landfill and biomedical waste. So both. Again, we have selected the service provider for Ramki. So they are going to handle that site. Because we are bifurcating in Tamil Nadu in 3 places. And from Salem, the other surrounding areas or Hosur, they can go to that place. And Madurai also we have already had. The only thing is it is not our site, but we are managing with that. That is, we are controlling the site. Site is owned by Ramki Group only, but we do audit, periodical audit and all. So that is our landfill activities. Apart from landfill activities, we are also doing. We are we are conducting seminars like that. Only we have 32 chairs in in-house training is there. So we used to conduct in-house. Because of this COVID, we are unable to conduct on in-house. So we are come up with the webinar. So each month in in-house training, we'll be having 2 sessions actually. So from that, we will give you the certificates, uh, something like that. So for that only, we are doing it in in-house. So maybe later on, we will start in in-house also. Apart from this, for the students, we are creating awareness among the students with the help of IIT Madras, Chennai, that IWMA as Young Environment Scientist. It's called Young Environmental Scientist Award. So from 6th to 12th students, we are giving award to them. So it will be 1 year, 9 months program. So there's a lot of selection committee is there. So it has to be the live program, and for any kind of environment solution, small level solution, they can give. So for them, we have to encourage the students. We are giving that kind of awards. We are also having Enviro programs along with the Science Olympia Foundation. Thanks to Science Olympia Foundation, because every year they are minimum 400 to 500 school students are participating every year. So supposed to happen and actually in the July only. So because of the COVID, this year we are unable to conduct the same. Maybe next year we are planning to do that. Apart from this, IIT, along with IIT, US Consulate and Polaris, we also had one program, Carbon Zero Challenge, to the South India level for all engineering college students. To same again, it is a live program only. So last year, one of the two years back, we conducted, and that student, one of the students has got a award from national level from the Prime Minister. So it is thanks to IIT Madras again and US Consulate for Polaris, because they are the major sponsor, and IWMA is also part of it actually. Like that, we are doing a lot of programs. Even recently, we are tied up with Sri Ramachandra Medical, Sri Ramachandra Universities, Industry Academia. We are going to sign MOU also for Ramachandra University. Like that, we have signed with the Madurai Kamaraj University. And 2 years, 1 year back, we have signed with the Madurai Kamaraj University for diploma course, 1 year diploma course for electropedic. See, for electropedic, for they are practically they are giving trainings, and students also they got the placements. And next 2 years, in fact, one of the company called Breaks India, they have booked for another 2-3 years. They will take this all the students, because that is per year they are going to take 25 students. So next 2-3 years they will be taking it actually, because we are giving as a properly trainings in environment or live programs. Even for hazardous landfill site, they can visit how they are doing, because the electropedic industry, all the wastewater will come. Again, we have to treat the wastewater, and some thing will go to landfill activities. So that kind of process, they are giving live programs. And from thanks to our Ministry of Human Resources Development, under the plan of Switch Action Plan, we are conducting along with MHRD, whole Tamil Nadu, we are conducting to all the colleges. Thanks to our Naveen Kumar, Professor Naveen Kumar, I have been coordinating with them. All the colleges, we are doing some programs for related to environment. Maximum it will be in switch action plans, and we are also planning to do that in lot of live programs in another coming days. And actually, I have a lot of subjects about the waste, but today we want to see our speakers. Their topic is hazardous identification and risk assessment. So we will hear from them. Thank you, sir. Once again, I welcome Mr. Suresh Tanwa, sir, and Mr. Sunil
Thank you.
Kumar, sir. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
Over to Vignesh.
Okay.
Vignesh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for addressing all the participants. Without any further ado, we will start our session with the two expert speakers in health and safety, Mr. Suresh Tanwar and Mr. Sunil Kumar, sir. Mr. Suresh Tanwar has been a part of Tata Groups as a Chief Group Safety and Health from January 2015 to 2018. He is now with the British Council as a head of the audit and consultancy. He is a mechanical engineer, a qualified safety professional, and worked in safety, health, environmental in both large Indian conglomerates and leading in multinational corporations, which includes Tata Group of companies, Tata Motors, Tata Chemicals, Johnson& Johnson, Castrol, British Petroleum, and Acer Steel for the global operation. He has widely traveled overseas and presented paper, imparted safety training and lead facilitate and conducted the safety audits in companies that we had worked for. In Tata Groups, he had a steering and leading effort across Tata Groups of companies in journey of safety excellence by enhancing safety performance and developing positive safety cultures through strategy and alignment initiatives. He his last role in Tata Groups as a chief group safety and health also involved the safety deep dives, specific safety audits that he had led across a group of companies. Other major initiatives included creation of a common and health and safety belief, safety management, safety standards for Tata Groups. He has taken several training sessions on safety leadership for senior leaders in the Tata Group companies as well as outside industries as a guest speaker as per the request from the organization. He is an international member of ASSP, American Societies of Safety Professional. He has received a presidential award in year of 2018 in Atlanta, USA for recognition his effort in enhancing safety in Indian corporates. I welcome you, sir, and Mr. Suresh sir as a passionate for safety, and he is a seasoned safety professional and recognized expert on safety in India. He is frequently speakers on safety and has been a member of the panel decision in the National and International Conference of Health and Safety. Welcome for the session, sir, and our co-speaker of the day is Mr. Sunil Kumar. Mr. Sunil Kumar is an corporate environmental health and safety and sustainable professional has a strong strategy thoughts leadership with a key focus on integrating EHS aspects into business practice for sustainable growth. He is a civil engineer with a master's degree in environmental engineering and a business administration. He is currently associated with British Safety Council as a consultant and worked in several reputed companies and research organizations such as ITCs Limited, Lloyd Registered, Acer Steel's National Environmental Engineering Research Institute in the leadership position. Over the last 30 years in the following areas: design, development, implementation of environmental health and safety and sustainable standard guidelines, and management system in fast-moving consumers goods, iron and steel, power, pulp and paper, hospitality and IT sectors. Development in implementation of behavior-based safety initiatives for the paper and paper boards and FMCG units. The third-party assessment for the certification of occupational health and safety, environmental and quality management system, and for several sectors, namely integrated iron and steel, thermal power, petroleum chemical refineries, cement, automobiles, engineering, electronic hospitality, constructions, mining, and consultancy service in India, UK, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and China, Thailand, Mauritius, and Maldives. And it's a pleasure to have both of you for this webinar, sir. And I let the session over to you, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vignesh, and thank you, Mr. Bhaskaran, the chairman of IWMA. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And
welcome, sir.
Very impressed with the kind of activities that IWMA has been undertaking for so many years that Mr. Bhaskaran had sort of listed out. It's quite impressive to do that. Thank you very much for this sort of information. Okay, so today's topic, we are now actually shifting from the environment-related topics we probably would have done in past few webinars, and this is more related to safety. And we're talking about risk assessment and management. So, the longest word is hazard identification and risk assessment, but in short form, we call it risk assessment. So risk assessment and management is the topic for today, and it's very central to safety. Everything that we do around safety, the risk assessment pops up like anything. Even if we face any difficulty in safety related matters, we fall back on risk assessment, and that is something that sort of gives a sort of a help to us to look into the problems and then put in the control measures so as to prevent any accident that can otherwise occur. So we can go to the next slide, Sunil. So what I'll do is just a very quick overview, not more than sort of 5 minutes on British Safety Council. Then I'm going to sort of take you through a little bit of principles around and perspectives on risk assessment and management. Then we'll have some slides around business benefits of risk assessment. Then we'll come to the core of what is risk assessment. Here, that is hazard identification risk assessment, and what is the process of doing it. What are the factors that actually can affect the level of risk? How do you evaluate the risks? And finally, applying the hierarchy of controls, because hierarchy of controls in the sense that what are the control measures that you should apply in order to bring down the level of risk? So there is some mechanism for that to understand, which is the most effective control and which is the least effective control. All those kind of things we will cover, and maybe the last slide will be the conclusion. So just to give you a quick overview of British Safety Council, and this came into being in 1957 by a gentleman called James Tye. He was the founder of BSC way back around 57 years ago or so, approximately. Yeah. So he is the one who actually was also propagating seat belts way back in 60s and all that. So well, seatbelt even abroad was not so much in force at that time, but he was propagating that. And of course, then a lot of health and safety rules and the regulations came in UK came because of his efforts and all of that. Now we do a lot of policy campaign and all that. We have 6,000 members, primarily in UK, India, and Middle East. So Middle East is another area where we are quite active, and our products and services include health and safety, environmental audits. That's the main thing. That's actually our main focus, and it's like a flagship product of ours. Then we also do advisory, awards, education. We have online education, online certifications and all that, quite a bit of them. And then we also do training and qualifications and all of that. And our awards include Sword of Honor and Globe of Honor. Sword of Honor is for safety, and for Globe of Honor is for environment. And we also have International Safety Award, which is application based. There are about 30 odd questions, and based on the response on those questions, the award is given. But for the Sword of Honor, Globe of Honor, there's an audit that takes place, and then there is a star grading that is given. Only company which gets 5-star, which is 92% and above, then you have to apply for Sword of Honor. There's another set of 4 questions and all that. And then when finally results are declared, one is eligible for this award, and this award is held in London. So this is a little bit of an information on the awards. We go to the next slide. So as I said that, membership, training, audit and consultancy, policy opinion, publication, all this is there. Now there is a very big event that happens in India, OSH India, Occupational Health and Safety India, which is held every year. It's also held in Bangalore, I guess, and Chennai, and Mumbai, of course. And of course, this year it was again through remote. But it is a sort of an event where a large number of safety professionals come and for those 2-3 days and attend that. In last year's program, our CEO gave an address in that forum of OSH India, which was held in Mumbai, and he gave the keynote address in the beginning. So we participate, and we also had a stall. So we participate very actively in terms of the health and safety activities, not only in UK, but India as well. By the way, our India office got opened in October 2017. All along, all our audits and training and everything used to be done by UK office, but now we have a team of about 15 people in India who are associate auditors with us, not full-time. I'm of course full-time, but like Sunil is there with us, and many others who are whenever the need arises, and we engage the services of the associate auditors with us. And we have about 40-45 clients who actively engage in 5-star audits with us. So that's what happens. Go to the next one. I think we have already covered this in conferences, award events and all that. I think this is more or less a similar slide. You can go to the next. Finally, our vision is that no one should be injured or made ill by work. So everything that we do actually goes around this vision statement. And so in terms of, giving our expertise, giving auditing, training, consultancy, all that work we do, including policy, policy and law, go into that effect of ensuring that, not ensure, you can't ensure anything, but to sort of make people aware so that nobody should be injured or made ill by work. So this was the brief, what you call the introduction of BSc. Go to the next, Sunil. So I just now wanted to touch upon the perspectives on risk assessment and management. As I said in the beginning, risk assessment is very core to safety. It's the heart of safety, I should say. And risk is omnipresent. It's present everywhere, 24 hours. There's no risk. Even if you're sitting in a room, the risk is always there. Something can fall down from somewhere, something can happen. Emergency can trigger anywhere. So it's not that risk is zero. There is never a risk is zero. Risk is always there. But our effort is always to bring down the level of risk. If the risk is high, we should bring it down to medium, medium to low. That's what should happen. And the lack of risk assessment or inadequate risk assessment or bad risk assessment actually can be a precursor to accidents. So if a risk assessment has not been done of the work, that activity that is carried out, it can lead to an incident. It can lead to a health incident. It can lead to a safety related incident, which is accident. So risk assessment to that extent is critical. And it is also to be done right in the, not only from the design stage, but from the conceptual stage of an organization. If they want to put up a plant, then where to put the plant, or where is the hospital nearby? So that also is a form of risk assessment. Then of course, design stage, detail engineering stage, a construction stage, erection stage, finally operation stage, and if finally after 60, 70 years, you want to demolish that plant or whatever it is, even that time. So it is in the entire ecosystem of life cycle of activities that happens in an organization. So risk assessment, as I said, is central. It runs thoroughly from all the phases of cycle of an organization. Now, risk assessment is of many types, and today what we are discussing is about hazard identification risk assessment. It is known as HIRA in short form. I'm safety professional, I guess they are there in this webinar, they would know that. So we are dealing with HIRA today, which is the most common type of risk assessment. Whether we want to do SAS 18001 or ISO 45001, this is the kind of risk assessment that we actually normally opt for. However, for a process-related industry, hazard study is a relevant risk assessment. For a storage of a chemical and all that, then QRA is the appropriate form of risk assessment. Of course, HIRA also will be there for the task-related activities and all that. So risk assessment is of various types, and we have to understand that what kind of application we want to apply for what kind of activities. So as I said, for process-related industries, it should be, excuse me, it should be hazard study. Now, hazard study is all about, you're sort of putting some guide words, if more flow is there or less flow is there, or more temperature or less temperature, or other chemical comes in, and then what can be the effect, and then what should be the control measure. So that's a kind of little technical study which can go on for months. Whereas HIRA can be done, hazard identification risk assessment can be done within an hour or so for any activity. And all these activities, HIRA and what you call, must be done by a team, because everybody's contribution should come. So when I cover this part of probability and severity, or likelihood and severity, we will know that if you were to arrive at a number, it should be a consensus number by a team rather than one individual's thinking. Otherwise, it can go off the rocker. It can go, it can sort of mislead rather than getting a sense of righteousness in that. So that is also important. Just go back if I missed out any point there. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So the other one is that, is safety or enterprise risk? That's a question that we need to ask. Like, for example, let's say, a process industry which is using high level of chemicals, and there are high level of chances of fire and explosion. Let's say, for example, let's say the lot of ammonium nitrate was kept in the warehouse in Beirut. We all have seen those videos now. So obviously the biggest risk of that storage was an explosion. So was that explosion considered to be an enterprise risk, which is a business risk at the very top, at the level of CEO and board of directors? Was it considered there? Obviously, it was not. That's why it was neglected. That's why probably no audit was carried out. That's why probably control measures were not there. All those issues were there. So the point is, enterprise risk means, business risk. In other words, enterprise risk management, ERM they call it. Other way a word for it is business risk. Is it a business risk? Is safety is a business risk? If it is there, in what form it is? So, is it in the form of contractors? Because there are too many contractors working. For example, in a steel plant, you will find 30, 40,000 people working or contractors. Or is fire and explosion the biggest risk? Or the hazardous waste itself is the biggest risk, because that also can catch fire and all those kind of things. So you'll have to sort of, look into, is it there identified? Is the risk identified at the very top level, and is it got a connection at the site level? That's an important thing. And we find many times in our audit that there is a disconnect. There is a disconnect. Top level will be feeling something else is the risk, and site level people will be saying something else is a risk. So therefore, there should be a line of sight and a connection between the two. And the top leader should always be aware of the top 2 to 3 or maybe 3 to 5 risks, depending on the kind of observation, organization. And is the hierarchy of control applied to bring down the level of risk? Now, when we say we're putting control measure to bring down the level of risk, are you putting the control measure only as PPE as a control measure? Or are you only putting training as a control measure? Are you thinking of eliminating the risk altogether? Are you thinking of substituting the risk with a lesser risk? Are you putting in other control measures, including engineering control measures? Or are you only looking at PPE and training, for example? That's another question to ask ourselves. And if the residual risk, as I said, should come down to ALAP level. Now, ALAP level is as low as reasonably practicable, as low as reasonably practicable. So you have to bring it down to high. If it is high, high to medium, medium to low. But even after putting our control measures, we find that the level of risk is high. Then is it reviewed at the topmost level? And it is there only for a limited period of time, maybe for 4 or 5 days, 1 week. It cannot be there for 6 months. High level of residual risk. Residual risk means it has to come down to medium or low level. But if it is still continuing to be high, even after control measures are put in, what is it that the senior management is doing in order to bring down the level of risk from high to medium? Is there more budget required? Is there anything else that is required which what you call can be which can be sort of in terms of infrastructure, or is it that that particular control measure will take time for the risk to come down? So those are the kind of things that we need to sort of ask. Then it's essential to identify the types of hazards. Therefore, it's critical to look at all activities and areas of operation. It is, for example, have you looked at all activities? Now, typically in a manufacturing plant, there could be 600, 700, 1,200 activities. For a building, maybe there will be just about 60, 70 activities. So we have to identify all activities. Only then we will be able to do a proper risk assessment and consider all the activities. And it's also important to involve the operators in that process. And we should have a standardized template. And we'll show you a template in the end as to how does a risk assessment template looks like. Because whatever we are talking into, ultimately it should sort of look into, what does it look like? So we'll share the template with you in the end. And the review criteria of risk assessment should be defined and followed. So if there is an accident, risk assessment must be reviewed. If there is a change in process, risk assessment must be reviewed. If all of a sudden, hazardous waste has increased or something, or different kind of hazardous waste has come, the risk assessment must be sort of reviewed. So therefore, you have to review the risk assessment. If there is a change in process, there is an increase or decrease in quantity, or there is an accident that happens, or if nothing of this sort happens, even then the risk assessment must be reviewed at least once in a year, or maybe once in 6 months, depending on what the organization is looking into. For a construction industry, risk assessment must be reviewed every week, because there's a dynamic industry. Every week, things are changing. Every week, it's an evolving process. It is not static. So you have to sort of have a periodicity also of the risk assessment that should be looked into. So criteria for review of risk assessment is also very important to be defined and followed. Next one. Now we see this kind of scene in our organizations. I've been seeing this for many years now, and it still continues to be there. Now, is it that these people want to die? No, they don't want to die, but their risk perception is low. That their risk perception, in the sense, they think that if the truck starts, they'll be able to get up and go away and all that. They don't think all of a sudden, if it's raining, the driver will come running. He'll just start without looking into anything. and then they will be run over. And every year, every few days, we find people getting run over like this while they are sleeping. So here the risk perception issue comes, that the perception of the risk of the level of employee differs from level to level. A senior management will understand that his perception of risk will be very high. Even if a senior leader is traveling by bus, he will not stick out the neck from the window, but you will find at a level of the driver will stick out the neck, not realizing that some other bus coming from behind will knock off the head. So the perception of the risk is very low. So therefore, when we are training people and all that, we have to cater the training program on risk assessment, perception, and all that according to the level of employees. It's very important because the perception is low. That is the point I was trying to say. The education and familiarity with the risk, because incidents have not taken place, they feel that they have been lying down like this because of sun or whatever it is for many months and nothing has happened. They continue to do that, not realizing that one fine day a tragedy can happen. Next one. So these are the hierarchy of controls I just mentioned a little while ago, and we'll keep coming to this because this is an important part in risk controls, and even Sunil will be covering in the end part. So as I said, that the most important is to eliminate the risk altogether. Now we can't eliminate. I mean, elimination of the risk probably is just 1 in 1,000 times, not even 1%. But you can, in some cases, then it should do that. Substitution is, you are substituting the hazardous chemical, for example, in the operation that we are doing to a less hazardous chemical. That's substitution. Engineering control is, for example, you're putting acoustics and all that. You're trying to reduce the level of noise from the source itself, so that instead of 90 dB, it has come down to 85 dB and all that. So, or local exhaust ventilation we are trying to put in, by which you are able to suck in the the smoke and dust and everything, and that is the engineering control, which is also quite effective. Then comes the administrative control. The administrative control is about the training, the rotating of people. If people are exposed to high noise level, then they are not exposed for months together. After 1 month, some other people come in and all that. So rotating of people, signages. Signage is also control measure because people see that and at least they become aware of the hazard and all that and the risk. Training, all these are soft controls and they are sort of administrative controls, changing the people that way work. And then finally, the PPE is the least effective control. Now, at this point in time, I may like to ask you, and why is PPE is considered to be the least effective control? Can anybody answer? You can then unmute yourself and respond, and then again mute yourself later on. Anybody from the team can answer why is PPE, when we wear PPE, we wear mask, we wear helmet and all that, but at the same time I am saying that this is the least effective control measure. It's a least effective control measure. We understand that elimination, substitution and engineering controls are very effective control measures. Why is this least effective control measure? Anyone?
Sir, there is option like
Loudly,
participants
please,
can
loudly.
participant can post their answers in the chat box, sir.
I think your mic is sort of not on, looks like. Little loud. Or anyone else?
I think, Suresh, I think that option is not given. They would put it in
fine.
the chat box.
Okay, then
yeah,
that's fine then.
They
Okay,
can put the answer in the chat box.
Why it is least effective control is there are reasons for that. Number one, it depends on the user. The user can take it out anytime. In a typical hierarchical organization, if somebody comes, senior comes, he will wear it. When it goes away, he'll take it out. So that is on the wish of the operator. The PPE may not be IS standard. PPE may be a substandard. PPE may not be maintained properly. PPE may not be fitting properly. So there are a whole lot of issues around PPE. So PPE is the least effective measure. Yet, because of the control measures which are on the top, may not be there, from time to time, very effective sometimes. So we try to, ensure that PPE, if we wear, things will be all right. So it's a good measure if in connection with the other ones. But if you only rely on PPE and not look at the other things, and the PPE, as I told, has got weaknesses, then obviously we are taking risk. So PPE is not an effective control measure. It is actually the least effective control measure, and we must understand that point. But in India, we go by PPE, and that's okay. I mean, so because if you are not able to eliminate the hazard or substitute the hazard, then PPE, of course, will work. Right. Go to the next one. So what are some of the business benefits of risk assessment? First of all, it helps in ensuring legal compliance because, there are various sections. The Factories Act also that says that the level of the hazard and the risk must be brought down. It reduces losses because in terms of people, plant, machinery, and materials and all of that, because, if the incident happens, obviously the incident cost gets reduced. It sort of creates a better workplace environment because when you do risk assessment, a lot of things get improved. Housekeeping also gets improved, and there is a better control on safety-related matters. The employer morale improves because the morale of the people, they sort of get an assurance kind of a thing in their mind that the company is looking at the risk assessment and they are sort of bringing down the level of risk. Of course, and in terms of the other areas like downtime in production is reduced. Reputation of the company is also sort of is sort of enhanced if a company is doing a fairly good amount of risk assessment because many sort of things get covered in that, and customer loyalty and all those kind of things also are benefits of that. Go to the next. This is an example. Supply chain risks create an opportunity to less hazardous materials in manufacturing as well as in product. So, what is the risk? There is a potential presence of toxic ingredients in materials purchased from suppliers. They can obviously be harmful to the people, to the environment, and to the health and safety of everyone who comes in contact with that. And this produces compliance risk also regarding chemicals regulations and reputation risk. So there is an opportunity. Identification of this hazard and the assessment of risks actually will help to eliminate supply chain risk and as well as create opportunity to identify alternative materials. And therefore, the company will be able to identify that and able to use less hazardous materials and eliminate the business risks. That is the example that we are trying to give here. The other is in terms of stakeholder management, companies with well-implemented risk management process and all that systems gives a greater amount of confidence to the employees, investors, suppliers, and customers, and different kind of benefits are there for different kind of, what they call stakeholders, whether it's better morale or it's loyalty or whatever it is. Now, legal also, in terms of legal also, there's a Factories Act, which is 1948, which defines and I mentioned it just about 2 minutes ago, that every occupier shall ensure that so far as reasonably practicable, which is the word that I was also talking about, as far as reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare of all workers while they are at work in the factory. So they have to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of all workers while they are in the factory premises. And failure to comply with health and safety legislation may result in occupier facing fines, compensation, imprisonment, and all of those kind of things. So obviously there is a downside of that. Not only that, I mean, if a company is not legally compliant, then it's also an ethical issue in my mind. And when I give, I take sessions with the organization, sometimes when I ask this question, what is the connection between ethics and safety? People struggle to answer, but there are a lot of connections. One is that if an organization doesn't is falling short on complying with the legal requirements on health and safety, may not be, deliberately. If it is not deliberate, then of course it is a question of non-awareness. But if it is deliberate, of course, then it's a case of ethical violation because there are legal requirements, and if a company chooses not to sort of follow that and just keep paying fines and things like that, obviously there's an ethical issue there. Ethical issue also in safety, by the way, I'm slightly digressing, is also if there is a under-reporting, non-reporting, incorrect reporting, late reporting of incidents is also an ethical violation. So there is a connection between safety and ethics. I just wanted to sort of touch upon that as well. Okay. The other is business benefits of risk assessment. It prevents significant financial losses because production time is lost if there is an incident that takes place, and training of replaced employees, damage to equipment and plant, because if risk assessment is a precursor to an incident, increase insurance premiums next time, and negative publicity that comes in. Because risk assessment is a tool that, you may ask, how does that all relate to risk assessment? Because risk assessment comes out as a failure for many of the incidents that take place. It comes out as a major failure. Risk assessment was not done, or it was inadequate, or risk assessment of this particular thing was overlooked, it was not seen. All those kind of points come out in major incidents that happen. I'm sure that the Beirut incident also, risk assessment would have been one of the big areas. that they probably would not have looked into, or for the last 4 or 5 years, the material was lying as it is. People have not reviewed the risk assessment. People have not seen what can go wrong. In risk assessment, one sentence is very important. What can go wrong? What can go wrong? And start with that. And then, what can go wrong? Well, this can go wrong, that can go wrong, explosion can happen, exposure of gases can happen, health can get impacted, fatality can happen, fall from height can happen, all that. So what can go wrong is a question that we need to ask in risk assessment from time to time. Next one. Now, from here on, I would request Sunil to take over, and he'll cover the rest part of the presentation. So I thought I'll just cover the initial part, about 20 odd slides. Sunil, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suresh. Am I audible?
You're not audible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear, sir.
Hello.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Suresh, and thank you for setting the context. Before I, go into the details of the hazard identification risk assessment, I would like to thank IWMA for giving this opportunity. So Suresh has already set the context, and having understood the, various perspectives of risk management and what are the business benefits. Let's now look at, how in an organizational context, how this risk assessment can be, conducted. I think I might stop the video because it's not moving on. Yeah. So the short form which Suresh has already mentioned about HERA. HERA is nothing but a careful examination of what can go wrong, what can cause harm to the people in a workplace. So this can be used to determine whether whether enough precautions or control measures have already taken place, or we need to have additional control measures to prevent the harm occurring and to bring the risk to the acceptable level. So the overall, in any safety management system, so the risk management, basically identification of the hazards and risk assessment becomes the important, aspect. So in the HERA, the term HERA, first we need to understand what is these two terms which are important, that is hazard and second risk. These are the two terms which has been very, very, many times we actually talk about that. So as per the ISO 45001 or OSHA's, the previous standard of OSHA's 18001, the definition of hazard is a source with the potential to cause injury and ill health. See, it is actually, as Suresh mentioned earlier, risk is omnipresent. You cannot have any activity or an operation without having any risk in place. But how do you reduce the risk? Because there is always a source which is there. So hazard and risk are two different aspects. So the examples of hazards are basically, look at examples of working at height, manual handling, machinery, moving parts of the machinery, exposure to noise. These are the hazards. So how it becomes risk? Risk has got also two components. One is how these hazards actually creating an impact on the people or causing harm. So that is basically how much is the likelihood of that event happening, or how much is the probability of it happening, and how severe it is going to be, how severe the harm could be. So generally risk is calculated as a combination of both likelihood and severity. Let's get into some more details on the hazards. What are the different types of hazards which we normally come across in our operations? There are, 6 or more categories of hazards. One category of hazard is under physical, like working at height. There is a potential for fall of people, exposure to noise, vibration, moving vehicles which can actually hit the people, hot surfaces where the temperature would be high. Electricity is a very good energy source, but if it is not been properly used, actually it can actually lead to electrocution. So the two aspects of it, the hazards is actually the source of the harm which can create, whereas when it gets realized into a injury, or which can lead to a loss to the people or machinery, that becomes your risk. For example, chemical hazards, especially we are talking about, very, very important, like operations like electroplating and all. We have used a lot of material, which are chemical material, which has got, some of them are toxic in nature, some of them are hazardous, flammable, all those things. So these aspects actually lead to various hazards. So you need to have certain risk assessment to be done. What is the exposure of these either gases or solvents to the people who are working in that area? Biological hazards, the bodily fluids, bacteria, virus, which is very, very obvious now, the impact of virus on the pandemic which has been created, fungi, mold. These are all biological hazard examples of biological hazards. Coming to the radiational hazards, you may be many industries may be using various examples like in the lab instruments which may be using certain X-ray, some radioactive materials which may be using it, even nucleonic gauges which may be using it. These are all have sources of electromagnetic, or maybe some of them are microwave or laser. And another important aspect is ergonomic. Ergonomic is one of the things which is, many places not given much importance in the organization when you do the risk assessment, or when you are doing the evaluation of various hazards or risk in a particular industry. How this ergonomic is important is because many of the places, the people's exposed to poor layout of the workstation or improper sitting of postures lead to musculoskeletal disorders. So one of the important one which you are quite commonly seen is actually something called carpal tunnel syndrome, which the people who are exposed to computers, where actually working in the office area, and as well as displays where you are continuously working in that. This is actually a disease which is causing pain or tingling effects on your hands and wrist because of continuous usage of the laptops and computers and other things. So this ergonomic is also an important aspect. You need to identify what type of ergonomic issues are there in the organization depending on the activities which have been performed. The other one is psychological. Okay. In the work environment where being overworked and as well as underworked actually create a psychological stress level to people, which actually nowadays there are studies which are there. All these stress levels actually create many lifestyle related diseases like high BP and diabetic and other things like that. So these are some of the hazards during your evaluation. These are the hazards you need to identify to evaluate what is the levels of risk in the organization. Now we will come to the process of hazard identification and risk assessment. This is a very generic diagram which has been given. See, any management system, which you all know it for people who are exposed to quality management system or environmental management system, where something we call it as PDCA, plan, do, check, act. So which is basically, those who are associated with the quality management system, they're quite familiar with that. This is called Deming cycle. The starting with that is actually plan your activity. In a safety management system, we need to first start with identifying what are the hazards and what are the risks associated with that. So the starting with the plan, when you do the hazard identification risk assessment, which identifies what are the significant risks which requires to be controlled. So that comes to the second part, which is the implementation of all those risk control measures to eliminate or minimize the risk. This alone is not sufficient. Once you have implemented, you need to monitor that whether these implemented measures are effective, are they being followed by the people, or is it just on documented process. So monitoring is the third part, which actually helps you to identify what is the deficiencies in the system, which would help you out in further review and improve your, again, the HERA process. Coming to the HERA process itself, there are the basic things to start with identification of your hazards. In order to identify the hazards, you need to first understand or list down what are the various activities in a particular shop floor or particular department happens. From that, we already have the hazards prompt list, which I have given in terms of physical, chemical, or biological in nature. Based on the hazards, you need to identify what is the effect of this hazard. If the electricity use is not properly done, it is not having a proper earthing provision is known, what is the impact of that? And to avoid that, what is the existing control which have been in place? For example, if you're given electrical connection to a particular machine. So you know the risk associated with this. If you're not giving a proper earthing to that, the person who is working to that can get electrocuted. So what is the control which you are applying is actually earthing, and as well as the measurement of the earthing at a defined frequency, so that the controls are being effective. This actually gives you your risk level. So there will be a risk rating which would be identified. And based on the risk rating, you would be able to arrive at whether this risk are acceptable or not acceptable. If it is not acceptable, you need to actually revisit the risk assessment, identify additional control measures. When you come back to the detailed process, these are the 5-step approach which has been taken for HERA. First is to identify the hazards. And second step important is who might be harmed and how it is happening. So for example, if you're taking an example, which I have given the photograph, which is given is the bench grinder, which is here. So this has been actually in the shop floor in the engineering workshop of a factory. You need to identify the various steps involved in the use of the operation of the grinder, which would give you various risks which is involved, various hazards which are involved. And who are all the people who are actually going to be operating there? So they are the people who are going to be exposed. Once you identify who are the people going to be exposed, then you have to evaluate the risk and what are the existing controls in this available. So the hazards which could be like you are using electricity here, when you are doing the grinding work, there may be possibility of metal dust or metal getting exposed to the people. These and how effective these control which have been put in place here. And more so, it is to be recorded. You have to have a proper recording system to identify what are the hazards identified, what are the risks, and what are the risk control measures. And this risk document, which is called the HERA document, requires to be reviewed on a regular basis, which has been mentioned even earlier also. Let's now get into slightly more detail in terms of identification of hazards. So one important aspect why risk management or risk assessment fails is the participation of various people. See, many times it so happened that a safety manager or a safety officer walk around and identify the hazards and put the risk controls in place. So this may not be very effective, several times. It's important that you need to bring in all the people who are working in that area and people who are, directly involved, like your operators, the contract even workers who are actually associated with the job, and ask them actually when the process being done, what actually can go wrong and what can actually, cause the harm to the people. The manufacturer's data sheets, their instructions should also be taken as input, and the previous history of accidents, near misses, ill health related to this particular process important. In the in the HERA process, some of the hazards may be very obvious, okay, like moving vehicles. Some other hazards you may not be really able to see it unless you get into details of that. So this I have already mentioned about that. The people who might be exposed is employees, definitely, and the employees who may not be directly, operating the process. There may be maintenance workers, cleaners, other security staff. There are occasions where you may not have a direct the people who are coming to your factory, that is visitors. They may also get exposed, so they need to also get in, their exposure to the risk also to be evaluated. Certain industries where you have a huge, materials stored, hazardous chemicals, or maybe fuel tank form, which are closer to your boundary or wherever. So the risk level maybe goes beyond your, factory boundaries. So that also has to be identified. Who are all those people, like nearby community or neighboring industry? There are some groups which are vulnerable. They need to be, also considered in your risk assessment. For example, young workers who are actually not, physically, they're even under factory rules very clearly says about that they should not be exposed to hazardous operations. So those type of various class of people, children, young workers, new and expected mothers, these newer expected mothers, where are they going to work? And what sort of precautions or what sort of measures which have been taken in the whole process. People with disabilities, new employees. It's very important that many times, the organization failed to understand the employees newly coming into your operational area have to be first trained before they actually put into operation. I mean, directly start operating the plant, because they may not be really aware about the risks which are involved. So risk assessment also has to be considered that. Similarly, home workers, lone workers, there may be occasions where people may have to work in an area where it is slightly away from the major operational areas of the factory. For example, a technician, electrician, which is actually working in an area which is away from that for a maintenance activity. So those type of activities have to be given importance. Then come to the risk assessment process. I will give the risk assessment process separately, but ultimately the principle here is need to evaluate the risk and identify this to bring down the risk to a reasonable practical level to protect people from harm. That is fundamentally the principle, for which the easiest way is to actually compare whatever you have risk is done, how best these practices are followed in this particular sector, whichever sector which you are dealing with. The fourth step is whatever you have done, the risk assessment, the identification of hazards, who are the people who may get harmed in case anything goes wrong, and what is the risk level, and what are the existing risk control measures. Because as we mentioned already, if the existing control measures are not effective, we may have to take further action, and who has to take action and when. So this is important so that there will be a monitoring mechanism in place to see that the progress of these actions which are in place. And review of the risk assessment, which we have mentioned earlier. It's very essential to review the risk assessment on a regular basis to make sure that they are still relevant. This is normally done once a year or depending on the industry, but definitely you need to revisit the risk assessment when there are changes in the process. There are new technology which have been introduced in your the shop floor. New equipment has come in. Even new people have come in, because there may be new people new persons who have come in and taken charge or started working in that. Under those circumstances, what is the effect or what is the change which is going to be in the risk assessment important? Subsequent to any accident or change in the legal requirement also calls for revisiting the risk assessment. Now, we need to understand what are the factors which is affecting the levels of risk, because you may have similar type of hazards in various industries. Okay, but the levels of risk could be different. That is actually depending on many factors: the organizational culture of that particular industries, or the type of equipments or processes which have been used. The various factors which are actually affecting the risk is, one is equipment. Incorrect or poorly maintained work equipment can have potential for impacts. For example, you have diesel generator sets where it has to undergo B check, C check on a defined frequency. Now, if that is not being practiced, there is always a potential to have an accident. Okay. Materials. We talked about that, any certain specific industries, maybe if you look at many of the organizations using various type of raw materials. These raw materials could be, having various hazardous characteristics. Some of them may be toxic. How are you going to handle it? How are you going to store it? So there is something called MSDS, which you might be all familiar with, the material safety data sheet. This material safety data sheet gives the details about how this material have to be stored and what conditions it have to be maintained. And when you are having process, what are the measures which have to be taken? Storage of incompatible substances, many times lead to fire incidents. Now coming to the next aspect is actually related to the work culture. See, if a person has not been given adequate breaks during due to big workload, heavy workload, or he's able to actually rush, or he's always under pressure, this leads to fatigue for him. So this also can create sometimes misjudgments. He may lead to make mistakes and lead to accidents. Similar is the case with working hours. Though working hours have been stipulated many times, circumstances lead to many of the people overworking that. One good example which we see most of the time is the transport industry, where the drivers which actually overwork or for a longer period of time, there is a very high chance of is falling asleep at the wheel. So this can lead to serious accident, which has been many times. You might have seen it also in the news and others. Other thing is actually on the organizational, health and safety culture. Are you actually motivating the people to follow safe practices? So if there is a motivation there for the employees, naturally, he would also give importance to that. So it's, people who are not motivated to work safely, because of the poor health and safety culture, is going to be more risk than those who are motivated to that. Training, which we have already touched upon that. The other aspect is the physical and mental ability. People who have, people should be given the task which has to be within their capabilities, either physically or mentally. For example, a young person, he should not be actually expected to lift heavy objects, or he should not be actually exposed to actually operating in hazardous areas. Third, the aspect is on the medical condition. People with known medical conditions, they have to be given tasks which should not actually aggravate their conditions. Alcohol and drinks, alcohol and drugs. Okay, these use of alcohol and even drugs, certain drugs, actually impairs people's perception about safety. Even some of the medicine which you get over the counter also can have side effects which may impair your perception. So that is why many organizations actually come out with policies, either in this case like usage of alcohol and drugs. Also, there are places where this is more prevalent. They actually put certain controls at the gate to ensure that how those people who are coming in, and also give them training programs and make them fully aware about what are the implications on the operation aspects. Now we will come to how do you evaluate risk. We have seen the 5-stage HERA process. The last part of it, first part is actually identification of the hazards. The next part is risk assessment. Risk assessment is, the purpose of risk assessment is to determine the level of risk and decide what are the existing controls are adequate or additional measures are required. So there are two aspects which is important here to understand. One is likelihood and second is severity. So if you have to be, as we were discussing about earlier, if your risk assessment has to be effective, there has to be, objective based approach you have to have in your risk assessment. There may be a team of people who would be involved in the risk assessment, and everybody has to come to the consensus in terms of what is the level of risk, for which you need to have certain ratings which have to be there. Otherwise, there could be always subjectivity which will be involved. This is a very simple risk assessment which we are talking about. Depending on the organization, depending on the operations, you would be able to improve upon that. You may give a score of 1 for an unlikely event. You can give 2 for it may happen, or 3 for likely, very likely, 4 and certain, 5. This can be further improved. Unlikely means you can always think about that this particular accident has never happened in this sector, but it may happen. So then you can actually give the lowest rating of that. It may happen, this particular event or an accident which has not happened in my factory, but we have evidence or we have information that it has happened elsewhere in the same sector. Likely means it can happen maybe once a year. The activity is actually performed once a year or once in 6 months. This is an example for maintenance activities. You have plant maintenance which may not be happening, on a daily basis, on everyday basis. It may be once in 6 months or once in a year. So that would come under this category. Very likely means which would happen maybe a month or maybe on a weekly basis. The activities which are happening on that, there is a potential for becoming a events that can actually come in. Certain means those activity which comes under on a daily basis. So depending on the operations or depending on the industry which you're working, you can decide about further on to these criteria. Similar is severity. Severity, this is a very simple example. You give the rating of 1 for the first aid case, second 2 for minor injury, that is basically a medical treatment, but it will happen within the site, which the treatment happens off site. That means the person actually has to go out treatment and comes back on the next day, the next shift. Third, basically the rating 3 is for reportable accident. Reportable accident is as per the Factories Act rules, and if it is more than 48 hours, he's off from the job, then it comes under that category. Rating 4 is lost time injuries resulting in disability, because it's a serious accident which has led to say one person or more people getting exposed, I mean having disability. Fatal for single or multiple, it becomes the highest number. Okay, this also can be further improved by considering even illness or ill health. That means if a person is exposed to noise for a continuously for the whole of operations, and there is a possibility that noise induced hearing loss possible for a person exposed to that, if he's not taking any controls, then it is becoming a irreversible illness which is causing to him, so that you can give the score of highest. So this particular example can be further elaborated considering your operations and activities. Now we have defined the likelihood and as well as severity. This would be the metrics which would giving the risk rating. Okay, so if there is an event which is happening, or an accident or incident which can happen very likely, and it can lead to a minor injury, then the score of 8 comes. Okay, 4 into 2. Similarly, you have, it is certain this activity is actually happening almost every day. It is certain, the likelihood is certain, and it may also lead to a lost time accident, may lead to disabilities. Then you give a score of 20, that is 5 for the likelihood and 4 for the severity. Now, once you have this risk rating for all the hazards which you have identified, how do you really going to take control measures? For that, you actually come out with a risk priority matrix. Risk priority matrix would give you a score of 1 to 4 you consider as a low. That means this low risk and doesn't require any further action required to bring down. But you have to continuously monitor to ensure that this risk would not really go up to medium level. The score of 5 to 10 you consider under the category of medium, where action is required to control the risk. You may put some interim measures in a short term, so that the controls, so that the risk is actually not going to go up. The highest one, that is the high risk, which is the score of 12 to 25. This is the place where the prioritized action which is required to be done. It is urgently to control the risk, which may require maybe additional resource in terms of finance, or maybe additional training, all those things which may be required in this category. Once we have this in place, the risk metrics which have been there and the risk priority metrics, this will lead to what are the controls which request to be done. That is where we come back to the earlier the slide where Suresh has mentioned about how the hierarchy of controls which is required to be emphasized. He has already mentioned about whether the starting from elimination to PP, it is actually an inverted pyramid, where the elimination is the most effective control, because you are removing the hazard from that particular process. That becomes very effective, whereas usage of personal protective equipment, which is not that effective. So how do you really remove the hazard? Okay, that is very rarely done, but that is most effective, because by avoiding that risk, is avoiding the hazard to be in place, you are actually eliminating that hazard, which is either you remove that particular activity or a process from your activity, or the machine itself what actually creates a hazard actually been removed from the process. That is being effective. Second is actually substitution. Substitution means you are replacing the hazard with a less hazardous operations or less hazardous material. Where you are doing a modification, or you are replacing the machine or a process or tools, that becomes substitution, which would be lesser in terms of the hazardous. Engineering control, which is basically more very seriously being pursued in many industrial operations. You are isolating the hazard. That means either you use sort of automation or robotic operations, or machine guards, which is an example where you have rotating machines, so that you put the guards in place, or limit switches in place, so that you are not exposing that rotary operations to the people around that. The next one is administrative control. Administrative controls is through implementing operating procedures, safe work procedures, work instructions, training, even though, warnings and signages, these are all actually giving, reminding the people, this is the, better way to actually do your activities so that the risk levels are actually brought down. The last one is using the personal protective equipment. The personal protective equipment, as he mentioned, has to be selected appropriate to the risk which you have encountered. So you cannot use any sort of a, nose mask, in an area where this is not applicable. For example, if you are using a nose mask which is, not usable for the dust, which is the chemical fumes or chemical dust which is generated in that area, that will not be effective. Similarly, the type of gloves which you are using it, or the shoes which you are using it. In some places you may have to use the safety shoes, and some places where it is risky, where it is slippery, you may have to use the shoes which you have anti slippery characteristics. So all these are important is if you are actually selecting the right PPE for the purpose. Just takes some examples on hierarchy of controls, how we are applying it. See, most effective control we already talked about. For example, you have a portable tool which is actually having a trailing cable. So there is a there is a hazard of actually people tripping over that cables when it is used, because it's normally it's been used in connected to one particular socket outlets, and then you had to work on a different location, slightly away from that. So you use a cordless tool, so that way you are eliminating that particular risk. Substitution is actually it also reduces the risk. If you're instead of solvent-based paint, which you're replacing with a water-based paint, the exposure of solvents to people actually gets avoided. Isolation, which is this is engineering control, where you reduce the risk by putting control measures, like for example here the example which is you're seeing in the photo is a machine guard which has been put in place so that it prevents anybody coming into contact with this. Administrative control, which you already discussed. An example is fall from height. You are an operation which you have to do it, where you are putting safe work procedure, you are putting a permit system in place in terms of who is actually authorized to actually work on that, what sort of a training which has been provided. All this actually helps you out in reducing the risk of fall in that activity. Then the personal protective equipment. So just give the right PPEs to be used for the type of work which is having risk, that the risk which is exposed to that particular work. This is an example of HERA format where one can look at. See, the format should have the department in which you are doing the this particular assessment. The date of risk assessment, it's important to actually know that, because so that you would be able to review within a year's time. The team people are, that means the team who are actually working in that particular process, whether you have a team of people like supervisors, operators, even contractor employees who are working on that. And eventually this has to be vetted by the head of the department to have a management oversight on this. What are the things you should consider in a HERA? The activity here at the activity and the sub activities. So activities also have to be split into sub activities, because each of the sub activities have different levels of hazards which are involved. Okay, so you have the effect of hazard, that is the risk which you're talking about here, and the current control measures. What is the existing controls which have been there, and you do the risk assessment considering the current control measures which are in place. What is the likelihood of the event occurring, and as well as what is the severity. Based on this likelihood and severity, you arrive at the risk level. And this risk level, you actually compare with the earlier risk priority metrics which you have talked about, whether it is acceptable or not acceptable. If it is not acceptable, then you need to look at the additional control measures. And along with these additional control measures, you need to have a residual risk assessment. What is the balance? Risk is still there, whether it is acceptable or not acceptable, or should I have some more oversight which is required. Just to give one example over here, the industry which has got an HSD tank form, or diesel oil which has been stored in a tank. So every week or every month they get a tanker which is coming in your factory for actually refilling this tank. So the first activity is the tanker which comes to the security which comes within your plant. Okay, so there is a movement of tanker within your factory, and there is a possibility. The hazard is actually there can be an accident by hitting by this vehicle. So there can be injury to people. So currently, I'm just giving a situation that there is no control which have been there. Then what we are talking about, the vehicle movement area and people movement area and everything is at the same place. So there is a likelihood of people getting hit by the vehicle at high. That is means very likely. Okay, and severity is also very high because there is a possibility that people may lead to a lost time accident with disability. So the risk level is actually high. It comes 16, so it becomes the risk level is high. So it is unacceptable. So what are the additional control measures you need to look at? First of all, can we actually use the same hierarchy of principle? Can I eliminate the risk? Not really, because you need to get the vehicle coming into that. So, but at least can I substitute? I mean, can I actually do some activities like, okay, what we can actually look at that. How do I segregate people movement and vehicle movement in the same area? So you actually segregate people movement and a vehicle movement so that your likelihood of a vehicle getting hit by a person is actually reduced. And also speed breaker so that the speed is controlled. So there could be a limited impact from that aspect. Then you also provide signages, all those things. So that all these measures actually lead to your residual risk to coming to a 1 likelihood and severity 3, which comes to a lower level. So that becomes an acceptable level. It is also important that you identify these, responsible people who are all actually going to implement these additional control measures and what sort of a time frame. This helps actually the management to actually look at in terms of implementation, whether it's effectively happening, whatever time period which we talked about that. So like this, you can actually look at other sub activities in that particular activity of HSD tank filling and identify the hazards and carry out the risk assessment. That becomes your entire document for this particular activity. This can be revisited later on if you are changing any of the activities or any of the process in this. So I just come to this stage. Now I request Mr. Suresh to actually take over from here. Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Sorry. Thank you, Sunil. I was on mute. Sorry. Can you go to the previous slide? I just wanted to just add 1 or 2 things there. Yeah. Thank you. As I said in the beginning that we'll share with you a typical template of a risk assessment, which Sunil shared and he explained quite in details. Only thing I just wanted to add, the name of the persons who are carrying out the risk assessment, the 3-4 member team, that also should appear on top. And also when was the risk assessment carried out, the date, and when will be the next review, periodic review. Now the review can happen if there is an accident or a change in process earlier on also, but when is the next periodic review, that date also should be given somewhere at the bottom or whatever it is. Then it becomes a very wholesome kind of a template. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right. So with that, that was important for us to show you how a typical risk assessment template looks like, because whatever we have talked today actually gets distilled down in that template. Everything gets captured there. Now this is the last slide, and you go to the conclusion now. So as I said, for everything in life, it's not so smooth sailing. There are risks all around us. Whenever there are higher risks, we need to bring down to the level of moderate risk or medium risk, and then finally to the low risk. Even if you cross the road, there's a risk, because one can get knocked down if you don't see left and right and again left. We can actually, become vulnerable to an accident, and that to a very serious accident. So therefore, there is a risk assessment that we do in our mind. In our mind we don't do it in a form of a documentation, but in mind we do that. So that's how it is important. So it's a very important part. It's a cornerstone of a health and safety management system. But it's important that it doesn't remain a documented system. It should be a livable document, not a document that is stored and only looked at after 1 year.